Hello, and welcome to the 101 Earth Observation Virtual Lecture Series, delivered by the Satellite Applications Catapult in partnership with WILDLABS. This lecture is about the remote sensing process. Let's start with the basic definition. So, what is remote sensing? Remote sensing is a technology that measures electromagnetic radiation to extract information on this Earth land surface, sea, and atmosphere. This sentence that describes remote sensing captures exactly the essence of it. So first of all, we are talking of a technology. So something that is a technological, let's say, we are in the technological sphere. And what is important, we measure, so it's a technology that measures electromagnetic radiation. So we are measuring something to do what? To extract information. So at the end of the day, what we want to have is information on what's happening on Earth, on surface, sea, and also the atmosphere. That's why we call it Earth observation. Remote sensing is a more general term, and Earth observation is part of remote sensing. A bit of a history of remote sensing. So remote sensing started really long time ago, in early 1900, with pigeons. So if I remember well, in the US, pigeons were used to monitor cities and to capture the urban landscape with cameras attached to them. From pigeons, we moved to satellite constellation nowadays, and there are so many micro satellite constellation up there. So there is a clear technological evolution. Let's have a look at advantages and limitations of remote sensing. Remote sensing, by definition, is unobtrusive. So we do not touch the surface. So we sense remotely. This is a clear advantage because we do not need to be specifically there. Another big advantage is that we can systematically collect data. So we can have a possible systematic data collection. So that means that we can capture data when we want, at the time that we want. By this way, we can provide meaningful information of whatever we are targeting. Which are the limitations? Remote sensing might be oversold. So that means that we are not actually able to provide all possible information about the Earth. So we can think, for example, to something that happens very deep in the surface that is generally not feasible to capture. Another limitation are human errors in interpretation and processing. So remote sensing needs quite some skills and expertise when it comes to interpreting our images and process our images. We will see more clearly in the next videos. And finally, remote sensing can be expensive. Although there are sources of data that are publicly available, there are other sources of data that are not. Again, we will see this better in part 4 of our lecture, but remote sensing can also be expensive. Remote sensing has a process defined, which is called the remote sensing process, and this is the core of our lecture. You see this picture taken from a book. You see the reference there, Introduction to Digital Image Processing from Jensen. This is a book that I'm using in my lectures, and you will see several figures from this book through this series. So let's have a look specifically at the remote sensing process. We start with the statement of the problem, which is what we want to do. So for example, let's say that we want to map rice fields, and we just want to have a mapping of rice fields. That's our problem. To do that, we need to collect data. Data can be of different types, as you see here, not only remote sensing data, and we will see better in the next videos, but also potentially in situ measurements. We might have a problem that requires some calibration of models and therefore requiring some data collected on ground. So this is the second part of the remote sensing process. The third part of the remote sensing process is the data to information conversion. In this part, we actually do the processing of the data. So we get our images and we derive the relevant information. In our case, they were like simply rice fields, maps or boundaries. So this is our third part of the process, and it involves really like what is called digital image processing. Final part, it's the information presentation. Once we got our product, we need to present it to stakeholders or to researchers, to whoever is this study for. And within this part, we often also carry an accuracy assessment of our results, alongside a proper presentation of the results. So those four parts of the remote sensing process are very common, and we will see this through all this series. Let's enter a bit more in detail in each of those parts. Statement of the problem. I mentioned rice, but as you see here, there are really a large variety of potential Earth observation applications, from Earth system and environmental science to global change research, climate change, meteorology. It's a very important aspect of remote sensing, sustainable development, safety and security, mobility, traffic, resource management, forest agriculture, and civil engineering and planning. So those are all part of potential Earth observation application. Once we got our problem, we need to collect data. Remote sensing has specific type of data that can be collected and can be categorized in mainly two categories. You see three here, but the main categories are, let's say, two. So what we call optical remote sensing, where the sun is the main source of energy, and active remote sensing, where the sensor itself is actually transmitting energy and receiving energy. The energy that is like reflected on the surface is the information that we want. We will go more in detail into the description of those specific sensors in the next videos. Good, we got our data. So what do we need to do now? We need to convert this data into information. Information is the key part of remote sensing. At the end of the day, what we have is an image, but we work on computers, so on digital images. And what the computer gets are just a bunch of numbers. So what we need to do is to process these numbers to get information. How do we do that? A colleague of mine properly defined this in different steps. The first step is the image acquisition and correction. So where we get our image, so this bunch of number, and we potentially correct. You see an example over there where we have like an image over a bay in California, which is very dark. So a first step could be simply to transform this image into something that is brighter. And this is through several filtering, which are also called low-level analysis. Once we got a better representation of our image, a sort of image enhancement, we can do the mid-level analysis, where we start extracting information out of it. So, for example, in this case, we want to create a land cover map, where from this image we get different portions of the land represented properly and classified properly. So what we are doing is that we extract information and we cluster and segment information, so that we have the image that we see at the right, which is a colorful image, but which doesn't have actually the land cover represented. This is coming at the last part of the analysis, which is the high-level analysis, where we actually classify this sort of information in different classes. So these steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, it's quite common in remote sensing, and this is what it's called what is called data to information conversion. Finally, we need to present this information. And this information can be represented in many ways. It's always important to present this information in a proper way, potentially in a catchy way, if you want to attract stakeholders, or having like a proper representation of our results. You see an example in this slide where we have it's a different subject in this case. What we see here, it's a bridge, and the points over there, they're simply measurements of the displacement on the bridge. We will see this specifically in the synthetic aperture radar lecture, but what I want to focus here is how we present this information. So our information is simply the measurements, but how do we present it? We present it in a 3D way with several layers of information. We create a platform around it, and we do this like in a sort of like fancy, catchy way. So I want to stress that it's very important to present the information properly. So we have seen these 4 different steps of the remote sensing process.